Nearing the end of the primer at this point, this small chapter is called Further Reading, and it's just to let you know about the documents, the books that I have consulted, read. Many of them I've read cover to cover, scouring them for tips and clues and further information as it pertained to the questions that would ultimately be on the locksmithing, not only the main test, the mandatory 250 question test, but there but as low as 25 question proficiency tests. And many of those documents were extremely enlightening about locksmithing in general or at large. Didn't necessarily have information that I needed to answer direct questions that would be completely industry related in terms of answering it correctly based on your experience. But when it came to lever tumblers, now this is a lock type that I would be shocked if anyone today in the door and hardware industry would encounter a lever tumbler lock. It's 18th century technology. Lever tumbler locks probably haven't been manufactured by a domestic manufacturer like Sargent or Yale in decades, maybe 75 years, something like that. And I won't deny it. I took the 25 question proficiency exam on lever tumbler locks many times before I passed. It got to a process of elimination at that point. Taking the test so often, it was swapping out one answer for the other. I believed I was answering all of them correctly. And that last time that I took it, when I said, well, I'll try this one, and I switched an answer, it worked. But what put me over the edge was I found that I had been answering what put me over the line, the finish line, to not over the edge. I was over the edge. What put me over the finish line to pass that test, because we don't get experience with lever tumblers at all. It's a lever tumbler is not difficult to describe. It's easy to see the anatomy of a lock, but you have the bolt, and then you have a lever tumbler, and this prep in the lever tumbler is the gate. And when you turn the key, the lever tumbler will rotate, and if it's in the right position, when you throw the bolt can enter into the gate. But if that's not in the right position, it can't enter. And I found that I had been answering one of the questions incorrectly in a 1924 Yale catalog. And the question was, can you retract both the deadbolt and the latch bolt on this type of lever tumbler mortise lock? And I was really convinced that you couldn't do both actions, because I had never encountered a mortise body that was, and I know that I never, and I may have encountered a lever tumbler lock at one point. Maybe in the early 90s, a client brought one and asked if we could repair it, and I took the cover off, and I said, I have no idea how these work. I can understand how they work. I can see how they work and understand the parts, but we wouldn't. It was a $12 lock sort of situation. And because I don't have any actual experience with lever tumbler locks, I had nothing to draw on. So it was, I went so far as to buy every book I could find as a resource on that lock type. I bought lock bodies on the internet, on eBay, so I could take them apart and investigate how they work. Safe deposit box locks are lever tumbler locks. You can buy those easily. That's very modern locking types. And once I had read in the Yale catalog, that's 100 years old, that you could indeed retract the bolt, pull the deadbolt back, and then retract the latch, I realized, goodness, I've been answering that question wrong all along. And I know that I was failing the test by one answer. So I was able to flip both of those. I was able to flip that one into the proper answer and finally get through it. So at the end of the primer is a list. It's not all of the books, but it is many of them. And let's switch to the screen view. we'll go over this chapter, then we'll switch back to the camera view, and I'll just show you the two. If you were going to buy any, these would be the two that I would personally suggest that you own. Let's do that. There are indeed too many good and great locksmithing books to review, and in fact, it would prove a financial, substantial investment to start and build a comprehensive library, though I did. My own started out small and grew quickly to 70 plus volumes. Many of these are listed at the end of this document, and I would like to thank Ariona Salfalari for taking the time to catalog and enter the title, author, and its ISBN and copyright date when those were available. Some of these are textbooks, and they don't necessarily have an ISBN. Maybe they're just industry pamphlets, not unlike this primer, I suppose. Though I do encourage you to start yours. I have read my entire collection and referred to some of them quite often, especially when it comes to not only the preparation of this primer, but also the rotating constant patterns. I have no desire or interest to try to memorize those. I just look those up in a book. Pascal's triangle, I have no intention to memorize that. I'm just going to always look that up. Books and publications are available from online bookstores such as, obviously, the Aloha web store. That would be the place to start. I've bought used copies of books on Abe Books and, of course, industry catalogs. The catalogs you already have at your fingertips. That's the place to start as well. Websites such as Reddit and even for the Kindle can be valuable resources of additional information. I do have some textbooks that are available on the Amazon platform, and Kindle is an Amazon property, at least it is at this time. The following list I would consider very valuable sources to permit your further study and would encourage them immediately, and would purchase them immediately, assuming you wish to continue studying this subject matter. Some are free, others are not. And my very short and most suggested list are as follows. Obviously, the ANSI standard, A156.28. If you're going to work in this business, you've got to have access to the standard. You can buy it from ANSI. The link is here. Okay. It is the industry governing document and is the center around which everything else revolves. Next is the Fundamentals of Master Keying. I'm going to show you that book at the end of this video. That's available from Aloha. I don't know if I bought it from the Aloha store, but I bought it from somewhere. In the spring of 2021, I participated in Aloha's Advanced Master Keying Specialist AMKS class, and I was all but starstruck to discover Jerome Andrews as one of the attendees in most of the 16 sessions of the class. I was able to tell him directly, albeit on Zoom or through Zoom, how much I appreciated his book and how helpful I found it in the continuing study of locksmithing. It is the most elegantly written locksmithing book that I'm aware of, and it's my opinion that Mr. Andrews missed his calling. He is a very graceful author, you know when an author makes it an easy read? He has that skill. The most remarkable aspect of this book is how elegantly the author discusses, teaches, and explains the topics. An advanced yet approachable book I suggest is Master Keying by the Numbers by Billy B. Edwards Jr., available from Lounging Lizard Publishing, and is full of several topics written from a more, say, advanced tone. It just is. Mr. Edwards is, he possesses an amount of knowledge over the subject matter that is unfair for one person to all have in one head. If you're gonna approach this seriously, you can't do so without a full review of that book. Having a library of books is irreplaceable, as you will have the ability to refer to them time and time again. As we say in DHI, you don't have to have it memorized. I don't have to have it memorized. I just have to know where to find it. Drawing on your library is how you do this. The problem with these libraries is they're not e-books, they're not PDFs, they're not digitized. They're good old-fashioned, put it on a bookshelf book. which is an advantage in certain instances. And in this day and age, it would be most preferable if they were all digitized, where you can search them with a Control F function on your keyboard. Reading an author's work that took time, study, and dedication to assemble, is the most intimate means to understand the nature of not only the subject matter, but the nature of the author as well. Most books you may encounter can be bought used, and I personally prefer a broken-in copy. I'll always look for a used copy of the book first, as long as it doesn't have really any highlighting in it, things of that nature. The spine's already cracked open. It's obviously someone's poured through it, and that's what I prefer, and it's less expensive. But truly, having a locksmithing library is one component of the learning process. The largest component I bring to you now, and I'm not sure what I meant by that statement. That's probably a reference to the next chapter. The largest component I bring to you now. And we're going to talk about the, right now it's November of 2021. In October of 2021, I took the AHC 220 exam prep locksmithing, the AHC 220 exam prep class. And while the next chapter is going to be touching on the things that you did get extreme exposure to, or at least good exposure to, through your DHI classes. So the next chapter isn't going to talk about, here's what you need to know. The next chapter is going to be basically reminding you of what you've gone through. And we're going to go, and I have consolidated that information through my primer that is based on the stuff that you've already been exposed to, reinforcing the concept that, it's probably a good idea to be able to answer these questions. Before we get to that, let's wrap up this video on camera. To wrap up our further reading, let's start with, this is, for me, the most important of all the books that I own, Master Key, Fundamentals of Master Keying, and it just is extremely well written and goes into details of information in an exceptional way under one title. That with this, it's an introduction to split pin master keying. This is not an introduction. This is bachelor's degree, and in my opinion, a good part of a master's degree. You go past that, and then you are really proving that you can demonstrate proficiency in advanced topics, that you are someone who works in locksmithing all the time. If you were interested to go further and you bought this book and you went all the way to the last page, whatever it is, page 225, and you understood everything in here, you are extremely dangerous on your feet. Jerome Andrews talks about, as I had said earlier, about what makes a good master key, talking about parity, bookkeeping records, obviously total position progression, rotating constant, how to talk about selectives, good practices, bad practices, and it's reinforced with examples. There's a glossary, and just really great stuff. There might even be quiz questions, if I recall correctly. I don't see any, but I think that there was. And I have communicated, I had reached out to Jerome Andrews through LinkedIn, and while his response, he didn't see the, I didn't know any other way to reach out to him. I didn't realize he was still active in Aloha. And while it took maybe several weeks, if not 6 months, for him to actually notice that he had a message, and I had asked him, if you recall quickly the story about Peter Field and looking at my Master Ring article, I had reached out to Jerome Andrews and asked if he would take a look at it as well. And while the article was done by the time he saw the response, His response was, "Sure, I'd be happy to look at it." Just extremely helpful. So if there's one book you're going to go after, my opinion, that's it. Here's Billy B. Edwards, CML Master Keying by the Numbers, and here is an example of that selective master keying that we talked about in terms of the method of progression. And what's neat is if you're interested in that matrix format, there is a substantial amount of matrix format information here, and the fact of the matter is he gets deep into it, and I would be lying if I said I had a great grasp over the matrix and a level 3 rotating constant. But his approach in this book is just is a unique perspective. So when you're studying locksmithing, each of these books brings you a different set of eyes to it, and every different book is a different set of eyes. And that's what I found enlightening, to see it through another person, through different authors' eyes. Okay, so let's wrap this up. Let's go to AHC exam prep locksmithing questions.